Chris, I appreciate you doing this. And I think just, hearing about your story, again, I appreciate you kind of leaning into this, and I'd hope to kind of unpack some of the life and career lessons that you've learned across your journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate it, and a fan of your show, and I'm looking forward to telling some stories.
Thanks. One of the places I wanted to start, just kind of looking at your resume, you've worked for some amazing brands, Abercrombie and Fitch, Under Armour, Merrell. I'm curious, what are some of the commonalities of some of the leaders that you've seen, like who sustain excellence, the ones you've admired from a distance or from up close? What are some of those commonalities or competencies that you think make them unique?
Oh, great question. And as I look back on my career, like I've been lucky to work for amazing brands, and to your point, some really amazing people at really fascinating times in those brand journeys. So at the end of the day, I'm a brand person and I'm a people person. I love thinking about brands and products and stories, and I love thinking about the consumer. But most importantly, I like working with teams and working on strategy and building teams and aligning teams around the work that we need to go do. So I sort of fell into this career. It wasn't what I went to school for, wasn't what I trained for. But I've been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, and certainly be around some great people along the way.
And so what are a couple of those competencies that come to mind when you think of the leaders that you've been around at any of those companies or your current company? What are a few of those commonalities of those great leaders come to mind?
First and foremost, we come down to building great products and telling great stories. And so this notion of building products and this idea of innovation and taking consumer insights and gleaning consumer insights, and then building products that solve consumers' needs, and then placing them at the right place in the right time, that solve consumers' needs, that are priced right, that are placed right, that people ultimately covet. And I've been around some brands that were really hot, whether it was Abercrombie and Fitch in the day, or Hollister, or Under Armour. Those were really covetable brands that people recognized, and it was fun to be on those great growth journeys. At the same time, people today want more than just great products. They want to participate in brands and open up their wallet and their mind and their closets to brands that mean something to them. And whether it was being a cool brand, or whether it was a brand that made athletes better, like Under Armour, or a brand like Merrell, which allows people to share the simple power of the outside. All of those things are critically important, and I think now more than ever. So great products and great stories, I think, are what make great brands.
Are there some people, one or two people, that come to mind when you think of those brand builders? You mentioned the word like insights around consumers. Are there a couple people that come to mind specifically?
Well, I mean, Kevin Plank. I mean, what he was able to build out of his grandmother's basement around Under Armour, it's probably one of the great entrepreneurial stories in the world. So lucky enough to have worked with him and learned from him, his charisma, his drive, the success that he has seen, and essentially literally building, one of the world's leading performance apparel and footwear brands, literally out of his basement, is probably one of the very best stories. So just being in a room with him, listening to him, hearing him talk about the brand and the people in the business was really powerful. And it came at a young point in my career. And so I took it all in.
I've only heard of his story of how, like, he was, I might've been like a How I Built This episode or something like that, but he had like not enough money to like go over, pay the toll booth to cross a bridge or something like that.
But the four founders would sort of rotate making payments on their credit card. This story that I heard from Kevin was the four founders would sort of take turns making payments on their credit cards to sort of keep funding the capital needed to grow the business. And I think there are plenty of moments where he was starting that business where, it wasn't actually sure where the next paycheck was going to come from, but his determination, grit, resilience, passion, and certainly vision for like how the world was going to change, really changed an industry. So that was a really lucky moment for me.
That's amazing. Who would you say has had the biggest impact on your career? Would it be Kevin or would it be somebody else?
Man, it's a great question. I've been lucky to work with some really good people. I mean, certainly my first boss at Abercrombie and Fitch, the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, I was a recent college graduate, sort of certainly a little bit lost. Didn't exactly know what I wanted to do post graduation, and I ended up working part-time at an Abercrombie and Fitch store. I was a caddy at a country club during the day, and I worked part-time at an Abercrombie and Fitch store at night. And literally on my second day on the job, the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch came and visited our store. And this is before anyone knew what Abercrombie and Fitch was. There were maybe 40 stores. It was plaid carpeting, antler chandeliers. It was nothing of what it is today. It had just been bought by the Limited. And Mike said to me, I'm going to make Abercrombie and Fitch, one of the coolest brands in the world for college kids. And, I was lucky to be there at that moment, meet him, decided to defer graduate school, which all of my friends, parents, family thought it was the dumbest, craziest thing they'd ever heard. And I went to work in the mall. Mike had a vision for that business, and I was lucky to be there at the right moment in time. And he took an interest in my career, and I was lucky to have him sort of shepherd me through my career. And I ended up spending, 4 or 5 years reporting directly to the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch in a job that, frankly, I had no right to have. I wasn't trained. I didn't have a giant resume, but he was very formative in my career, and I was very lucky to be around him when I was there.
Why do you think he took to you over that time?
Probably because I was a lost college graduate who was willing to work really hard, who didn't have a whole bunch of preconceived notions and was willing just to learn how he wanted things done. I mean, there's lots of things have been said about Abercrombie and Fitch in that time, and certainly that company has been through a lot of change. But I think he had a vision for what he wanted to build, and I was willing to work really hard.
I remember the store in San Francisco. We used to go there all the time. I mean, it was never not busy. I mean, in the heyday, that thing was crazy. I opened that store. I spent 10 days on Market Street opening that Abercrombie and Fitch store for Abercrombie. So I lived in San Francisco for 10 days opening that door. My sister actually worked there. I don't know exactly when, but she was, when she, you were in college working in malls and things like that. What a crazy story. Okay. I didn't even know much about him. So it's an interesting backstory. Okay. So help me understand where you grew up. It sounds like you spent a lot of time in Michigan. Your college is sort of an hour and a half away from you now, if I'm right. Detroit's all the way on the east side. You're on the west side. Where did you grow up exactly? Yeah,
I grew up outside of Detroit. I grew up in just a suburb of Detroit. My parents were teachers. So I grew up in a household of educators, just grew up in, just a sort of a very, very average, typical Midwest upbringing, played sports and, went to a local school and, ended up going to Alma College, which is a college, a couple hours, north of Michigan, and, just a small liberal arts school. And, was really lucky to find a home there. I went there to play basketball. I quickly realized that I wasn't good enough to play college basketball. The difference between a high school athlete and a college athlete is night and day. I quickly learned that I didn't have the skills to play college basketball, but I'm lucky enough that the coach recruited me to that school. I made some great friends and found an amazing advisor, and was really lucky to have that college experience.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'4".
Did you get like a scholarship?
It was Division III. So I got financial assistance, but not a formal scholarship. And I tell everyone, people ask me if I played basketball, and I'm like, I say that, the difference between a high school athlete and a college athlete is a world of difference. And I was lucky enough to be good enough in high school to get some attention because I just worked really hard. I hustled, I took a charge, I played defense. And I sort of knew where to be. It wasn't because of talent. I just worked hard. You get to college and everyone works hard and everyone's smart and everyone knows where to be. And all of a sudden talent actually means something. And I didn't have the talent.
That's cool. I'm wondering, what did your parents teach? Were they like high school teachers?
My dad was an English teacher and became an administrator. So he's a principal. And then my mom taught elementary school.
What do you think, the choices that what do you think them being teachers, how did they influence you in terms of any choices you made in your life or career?
I think that's a really good question. I think, one thing that I think a lot about, and one thing I'm trying to impress, I have 2 boys, soon to be 15 and just turned 12. And, the one thing I try to impress upon them is this notion of grit and resilience, and then preparation, just being prepared. Whether it's, laying your clothes out the night before school, whether it's doing your homework, whether it's showing up a little bit early, whether it's going and asking your teacher for help, whether it's getting a tutor, This notion of there's lots of people that have tremendous talent and intellect and God-given abilities. But this notion of preparation and grit and resilience, I think anyone can have those things. And so just this notion of showing up on time and being ready for whatever the day calls, I think is a trait that I think I learned young, and certainly I'm trying to impress on my boys.
So this idea of preparation, if you've heard some of my interviews, it's been something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's something Guy Raz and I talked about quite a bit. And I mean, you're prepping for board meetings. They're prepping for school. When you think about that idea of preparation, is there such a thing as over preparing, do you think?
Great question. And it's funny, it's a really important topic in my house right now, because I think too much preparation and too much worrying creates anxiety or anxiousness. And that anxiety then can lead to performance issues, because you build it up so much in your head that you build all of this pressure on yourself, and that leads to anxiety, which suppresses performance. So I think that certainly is the case. And I think everyone's wired differently. I think one of the things that I've learned in my career is that everyone's motivated by different things. And when I lead teams or I lead brands, or even how I parent Owen and Henry, what motivates Owen is different than what motivates Henry. And what motivates my chief marketing officer is something that's different than motivates my chief product officer. And how do I figure out to lead those people differently based on how they're wired, or how they take in information? So I think it depends on the person. For me personally, I like pressure. I like no drama. Everyone knows that I don't like drama, so I try to take drama out of the situation. But I do like those high stake moments because I do like to test, and I do put a lot of pressure. I try to put the right amount of pressure on the team to perform, and I certainly put a lot of pressure on myself to perform. And I think, and I know now that I'm old, I know the things that help prepare me, and I know the type of morning I have to have, or the type of evening I have to be my best. And there were times early in my career where I would show up at work and I wasn't prepared because I had not mentally prepared myself or physically prepared myself for that day. And I had some really good friends and colleagues who would pull me aside and say, "You're better than that. And frankly, you owe the team more than you just gave us." And it's taken me a long time to sort of figure out how to prepare myself for the day and how to best manage myself to be my best self at work, because I need to do that. And if I don't do that, then I let everybody down. And that's a horrible place to be.
It's cool that it sounds like you've taken inventory of what good looks like for you and what bad could look like. You mentioned maybe being in a meeting and some of your friends pulling you aside. Was there a moment you can share that maybe kind of helped you learn that?
Yeah. So I was at the Gap, and a dear friend of mine who's had a great career on his own. We were involved in a really sort of high stakes turnaround for the Gap at the time. And a handful of us were selected to work on this project. And we were working with some really smart consultants, and we were at an offsite, and we had a really bumpy meeting. And I didn't show up great. I was maybe too cynical, or I was a little too critical. I wasn't trying to solve for yes. I wasn't coming in with positive intent. And I walked out of that meeting for a coffee break, and my friend pulled me aside and said, "You need to embrace your role as a leader. We are all depending on you to be great, and you didn't show up as your best self. And I know you can do better." And he said it with passion, because in those days it was a high stakes occasion for us at the Gap. And the work we did meant success for the Gap or failure. It meant success for individuals and families. And we were all young. We were probably all over our heads a little bit, but he had the courage to pull me aside as a friend and say, we need more out of you. And you can be better than you were. And I'll never forget that.
What do you think you would have done differently, knowing that in hindsight?
I think there's this notion of embracing your role as a leader that's really important. And when someone gives you the responsibility to lead others or lead teams or lead brands, that is not a job that you can pick and choose when to go do that. You are that person every minute of every single day. And if you had a bad night, or you got in a fight, or something went wrong at home, or whatever, when you walk into the next meeting, you have to leave that behind. And you have to sort of go in knowing that people are looking for you to lead. At the same time, my view of leadership has changed. I think, and I'm sure you've heard this and we've all seen this, but this notion of like what I think my job is today is different than what I thought my job was 20 years ago. I used to think that I had to have the answers, and that as a leader, I was paid to be the one to come up with solutions, because I worked for a lot of leaders that were sort of that they were cast from that, and they had all of the answers, and you just literally took direction from them. And my view of leadership has changed and evolved, thankfully, over time. And when I walk into a room, once I've built the right team and we've sort of set the right strategy, a big part of my job is unleashing their talent and their potential. And then, aligning us, making sure that we know who's on the bus, what work we're going to go do. And then really importantly, to ask the right questions. So when I go into meetings now, I don't view it of my need to have the answers. My view is to walk into that meeting, making sure I trust the people that I'm with, but then ask the questions that they may not have been able to ask themselves, and sort of ask those provocative questions that really pressure test the idea. And then ultimately, as a leader, we are paid to, if we have to arbitrate, we're paid to make those decisions. But, my best day is when I don't make a decision. And my best day is when we go in and we build consensus and we build coalitions and we sort of coalesce around what we think is the right answer as a collective team. And I've asked what I think are the right questions, and we've gotten good answers. So I would say for me, as I think about who I was when I was 25 to where I am today, it's a fundamentally different view of leadership. And that has been sort of painted by the people that I've worked for, and then everything else I've learned, whether it's reading books or listening to podcasts or just observing.
It reminds me of that Scott Belsky quote that, as a leader, you're the emotional thermostat of your team, right? So even when you walk in the room, like they're looking at you, right? Like they're sort of gauging your attitude, how you bring yourself to work, how you show up. All of those little things, it sounds like now you've thought a lot more of. So I really appreciate you sharing that story.
Well, let me just take that one step further. I mean, I've got a couple of things that, that you talk about the emotional thermostat. I mean, I'm 6'4". I've got a receding hairline. I'm an introvert, and smiling is not my natural facial expression. So like, my nonverbal communication when I'm not paying attention is not great. So I have to actually step harder. I test pretty high as an introvert on all of the tests. And so, when I come to work or I'm in certain sessions, I have to really be cognizant of that and sort of step out of my comfort zone, step out of where I get energy from, and make sure that I'm fulfilling that. Because again, the natural way I comport myself, people will be like, wow, he's kind of standoffish. So I have to work against all those things that just how I am from a nonverbal standpoint.
Interesting. Have you ever done it like a 360 review?
Oh, yeah, I've been lucky. I mean, when I left Abercrombie to go to the Gap, I would say the biggest reason I left, other than I had some issues with where the brand was going at Abercrombie, I really wanted to develop as a leader. And there was not a lot of leadership development at Abercrombie at the time. And at that time, Gap was just famous for just developing leaders and all the amazing people that have come out of the Gap organization over the years. So we hired a leadership coach. I took classes. I took Myers-Briggs. I took all the battery of tests. I've had more 360s than I care to admit, because I think they're so, as hard as it is sometimes, they're so beneficial to really get that direct feedback from your managers, from your peers, from your direct reports. But all of that information is super helpful. So I've done all the tests, and it's really helped me tremendously.
You mentioned the sort of being an introvert in the body language. I'm curious, what was the most important thing that you learned from those 360s?
It's hard to even start. I think the unintended consequences of nonverbal communication. Just how people read me. I'm an introvert, so I'm a processor. So you combine being a processor who thinks before they speak, combine that with someone who is just generally quiet to begin with, and again, who has balding and a little bit of a serious demeanor. You put all of those things together, and you're sort of starting behind before you even start. So you have to work against those things. I also think too, this notion, a coach told me this a long time ago, and I think it's really true. You know, it doesn't take very long for people to create a perception of yourself to people. People sort of form those opinions fairly early on based on their interactions, how they see you, things that you've said, how you walk, how you carry yourself. And once you have that perception out there, it's actually really hard to change that perception, and how much longer it takes to change that perception. So just the importance of how you carry yourself and how you show up. And again, I think early on when I was sort of young and naive, like I would sort of bristle at that criticism or that feedback. I'm like, well, I didn't intend that. Of course you didn't intend it, but that's how people took it. And so at the end of the day, how people think is really all that matters. And it really makes you think more carefully about how you carry yourself.
I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned Abercrombie, and before we were recording, you mentioned a story about maybe your departure. I'd love to hear that if now is a good time.
Yeah, no, I mean, Abercrombie was very formative in my early days, and I went to school. I didn't go to school to work in the mall, but I'm certainly glad that I found myself there. And I deferred graduate school, ended up working as a part-time manager in training, and then eventually an assistant manager. And then about 7 months into my tenure, I was given my first store as a store manager. So I was working at the 12 Oaks Mall in Novi, Michigan, during back to school in the summer of 1995, it would have been. And I remember I had gotten that store, just a couple of months earlier, and we had it was back to school. And these were the days when it was actually funny, as I looked this up. I got my first store at Abercrombie & Fitch a month after Amazon sold its first book. So when we think about how commerce has changed and how the world has evolved, I was running a store when malls really meant something, and Amazon had literally sold its first book a month prior to when I first got my first store. So malls were it. And at that point in time, Abercrombie was a hot brand. And so it was middle of back to school, and back to school used to be like a 4-week window. Now you start back to school in June and ends sometime in October. And if there even is a true back to school season anymore, back then it was literally like a 4-week window. And it was back to school. The store was busy. I had thought as a store manager that if I just did the things that I had done as an assistant manager or as a part-time associate, if I just did those things better, I'd be a successful store manager. And I fell into the very common trap of how do you go from being an individual contributor to being a leader of others? And the most confounding thing about that shift is that what made you a good individual contributor is actually works against you as a leader of others. And I didn't have leadership books. I didn't have a coach. I was 25 years old and frank and pretty naive and not super smart, to be honest. And so I got my first store, and I thought if I just worked just as hard as I did as an assistant manager, everything will be fine. And it worked completely against me. My part-timers quit because they went back to college. I had a couple of assistant managers leave because I wasn't a great manager for them, and I wasn't leading them the way they wanted to be led. And my store got short-staffed, and we were really busy. And I'll never forget, it was August. The next day I was going to have a visit from the home office. And back then, visits from the home office were a big deal. Like, people were, famously fired for having a bad store visit from someone from corporate. And I remember it was 3:30 in the morning. I was folding wool sweaters on the plaid carpeting of 12 Oaks Mall, listening to Gin Blossoms on the store system by myself, folding sweaters. And I ended up staying all night in the store by myself. Store was still a disaster. It was a train wreck. The fitting rooms were piled with jeans. The cash wraps were a disaster. The mannequins were disheveled. I hadn't dusted. I had lights burned out. And the next morning at 8 o'clock, the visitor from home office shows up with a cup of coffee in her hand from the coffee beanery. And my store was a disaster. And this time at this point in time, you have to sort of think about where I was. I had graduated from college. I had a mountain of student loan debt. I had deferred graduate school, the school that I wanted to go to. I ended up deferring it because I was a little bit of a lost college graduate. And I thought I was going to be fired that morning. And thankfully, she came in, and she'd obviously seen this before, and she didn't fire me, but she pulled me aside and said, "You're failing, and you're failing because what you think will make you a good manager is not the right thing. You need to go build a team, and then you need to empower and motivate and align and inspire a team to go do great work for you." And Luckily, I wasn't fired. She stayed in my store that day. I literally went out and recruited some other people to come work for me that day. In fact, one of the managers I hired that weekend, I was lucky enough to not get fired. I was lucky enough to turn my store around. About 6 months later, I was promoted to run the Mall of America store. And one of the people that I hired the weekend that that person from the home office was there, that woman then ended up running my store when I left. So it actually ended great, but it was this really painful experience. And you hear this all the time. Growth happens in the toughest of times, and that was a really tough time because I was a scared 25-year-old that thought I was going to lose his job. But that person took a kindness on me, and sort of really thought about what I needed to learn and do different. And she was patient, and luckily it worked out.
Oh, that's great. Did you ever get fired from Abercrombie, or that was the almost I got fired?
I almost got fired from Abercrombie. I never got fired from Abercrombie. I was lucky to be an assistant store manager, then a store manager, and then a district manager. And then I spent the last 4.5 years in the home office. So okay. I was lucky not to be fired, but if I would have been fired, I would have deserved it.
Tell me about these inflection points in your career. You mentioned every sort of move you made has been, really tough decision. And I'm curious, it's interesting because like I have questions about that. And mostly people don't proactively mention it. It's like, if you talk about what is maybe the toughest career decision you've ever had to make, is there one that comes to mind, or is it a number of inflection points that you had to decide?
I would say two moments, two big moments. I think first was leaving Abercrombie. I had spent the better part of a decade at Abercrombie. It had become like family. The woman I'm married to today, I met at the home office. I still have very dear friends who worked there or worked there after I left. And we were living in Columbus, Ohio, and ended up taking a job with the Gap in San Francisco. And I'll never forget, pulling away from our house, going to the airport to fly to San Francisco. And, at that point in time, we were young. We were not even 30. But I remember the sort of the security that Columbus, Ohio afforded, right? It was a small Midwestern town. I had spent a decade at Abercrombie. I was firmly rooted in my job. I had built a good team. I was reporting to the CEO. It was very comfortable and secure. And I ended up returning a headhunter's phone call for the Gap and ended up taking a job in San Francisco. And I'll never forget, going to the airport and flying to San Francisco and waking up in San Francisco being like, what are we doing here? You can't think of there aren't too many places much different than sort of suburban Columbus, Ohio to like south of Market, San Francisco. But luckily I have an amazing wife who was super supportive, and we sort of forged a new life there. But we were really scared. Both of us were deathly scared to sort of pick up everything that was comfortable and go try something new. And we sit back here today, 20 years later, and we laugh about it. How we remember how scared we were. At the same time, it has completely changed the trajectory of both of our lives. It was an amazing moment, but there were lots of sleepless nights.
When did you know it was the right move? Did it take 6 months longer?
No, less than that, because Gap was such a great place with really good people. And at that point in time, we didn't have kids yet. We didn't have a dog. We bought a loft south of Market, and all of a sudden we sort of got swept up in the Gap life and living in Northern California, and being sort of young without a lot of responsibility in San Francisco is a pretty great place to be. So we knew pretty early on, but it was a huge transition for us. But it was scary. But it was some of the best days were those days at the Gap.
What was the other inflection point? You mentioned two.
Yeah. So when I came to Wolverine Worldwide, I've held a couple of different roles. I came as president of direct-to-consumer operations, and then I took a corporate strategy job, working upstairs with the CEO and the CFO, and doing things like corporate strategy, business development, consumer insights, market intelligence, investor relations, corporate communications. It was a very sort of staff administrative role for the company. And I remember having a touch base with the CEO who was my boss, and we were talking about my career, and he's like, well, what do you want to go do next? And I said, I think I want to, I have aspirations. Like I want to go do something. And I, as much as I appreciated the job I had then, like, I think I want to be in a business. And he sort of gave me some options. But, that moment when you sort of left the security of a corporate role to go actually run a brand, that's a lot, because, there you're measured by your P&L and by your success and by your market share and by your team. And so I sort of left the security of a corporate role and went to run a business unit. Like that is, that's where you really get put to the test, because, ultimately, like, those decisions are very measurable. And so that was a moment where I took a chance, and luckily the company had faith and gave me that opportunity. At the same time, you sort of left something that you knew to go to something that you didn't know. That was a moment.
To use a sports analogy, it's like you left the booth to be a head coach, and now you're measured on wins and losses, right?
Yeah.
And like nobody cares about anything else.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a really good analogy. And I would, to a certain extent, part of my job in the old role was to be the reporter or give the box score of what happened in the game. To your point, to be in the booth, to actually going out and actually calling the plays. And that's a big transition. So that was, I still go to bed worried about decisions that we make.
What do you think has kept you at the company for over 14 years?
Oh, that's a great question. I think certainly the people. There are some really great people here who I really enjoy working with and I get energy from. And I certainly appreciate that. I think working for a portfolio company, one of the reasons why I left Under Armour is I was talking to the CEO here. And when I left Under Armour, my oldest son was 10 months old at the time. And Saucony, I love it.
You said portfolio, so
yeah, all right. So I was at Under Armour, and we, my wife and I had our first son, and he was 10 months old at the time, and I got recruited by Wolverine, and I ended up interviewing here, and the CEO said something to me. He's like, the advantage of a portfolio company is that you could come and do 3 and 4 and 5 jobs over the course of a career and never have to sell your house or move again. It was important to me. I really try to, when I'm done with my career, I hope to have a good career. At the same time, I hope to be viewed as a really good dad and a really good spouse. And so family's super important, and really giving Owen and Henry and Jill a really great life. And the notion of picking up and moving every 2 or 3 years to take the next opportunity didn't feel great to me for giving them a really good upbringing. And so when the CEO at the time said, you can come and do 4 and 5 and 6 jobs, you never have to move, like that really resonated with me. Like that really appealed to me, because I had moved a bunch. I had moved, 3 times with Abercrombie. I had moved from Columbus to San Francisco to Baltimore. So we had moved a bunch, and moving's hard.
It's underrated, right? It looks easy on a resume. And you mentioned people. Another thing I think is underrated for people, that you don't think of it until you don't have it. Some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah. So I sort of got to the place where I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep moving. And so this notion of working for a portfolio company where you can come and do a bunch of different jobs and have a really good career really resonated with me. And to his credit, and to the company's credit, I've been really lucky, because I literally have had 4 or 5 different jobs here. And I've never had to move, and which has allowed me to have my kids stay in school. They make friends in the community. Like it's been a very sort of solid upbringing for them. And giving them a great foundation, and giving them a great home, is sort of like part of what Jill and I, like, what our North Star is.
Chris, in your responsibility today, roughly, I know you guys are a public company, but like I was trying to do some math here. Is your responsibility about $1 billion and a couple thousand people, or how would you sort of frame it?
That's probably pretty close. Yeah. So I'm currently global brand president for Merrell, and I was most recently named president of the Active Group. So the Active Group consists of Merrell, Saucony, Chaco, kids, and licensing. So your math is directionally accurate.
Oh, cool. Okay. That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like an amazing opportunity in terms of where you're at. I'm curious, if you think of your direct reports, if I ask them, what kind of leader is Chris? What do you hope that they would say?
Oh, man. I hope that they would say, Chris cares about the team. And that Chris works to create teams and people and environments and experiences that allow us to do our best work. I was not trained to do this. I didn't go to school for this. I've been lucky to have some great mentors and work for some great bosses, but ultimately, my team are way better at what they do than I am at what I do. So, when I come to work, it's to really provide great environments and spaces and places for them to go do great work, and both physical spaces and sort of emotional spaces. And how do I sort of motivate the team to go do great things? So when I think about that, I hope that's what they would say. And I hope that they would say that, he's encouraging and supportive. Hopefully there's some level of inspiration. And certainly I think, one of the things that I look for in people, and I hope that people would say this about me, is there's a handful of things I look for when I interview people, but one of the things is this notion of refusing to lose. There's a great quote, I think, in Moneyball. I hate to lose more than I like to win. And I love people that this notion of just refuse to lose. And I've got a couple of people like that in my team, that they just refuse to lose. And those are the people that I bet on, because regardless of what we're going through, they're going to find a path to success. And if you can build a team of people like that, you can do anything. So I would hope that they would say there's a level of grit and resilience and passion for results. Hopefully they would say that. And at the same time, I sincerely hope that they would say that I work to give them platforms to do great work and ultimately advance their careers.
One of the things I heard you say was creating psychological safety, essentially, which I think is so, especially in this market, is so huge, right? Just to know that you can come to work, be yourself, be authentic, and not have to worry about the next day, which is great. Is there an achievement that comes to mind when you think of proud sort of milestones and things like that over the last 3 to 5 years, one that you're most proud of?
I'm really proud of the work, what Merrell's done. Merrell has had a really great run for the past handful of years. And there's a list of things that I'm proud of. We were lucky to be named Footwear News' Brand of the Year, which is a really great accomplishment for us, and have Merrell mentioned in the same sentence with a brand like Jordan Brand or Hoka and On that recently won the award as well. To have Merrell in that conversation, I think is tremendous. We were just named one of the best places to work by Outside. To have, and that's a pretty rigorous process, where where you actually really have to work hard. We had 100 people complete a 20-minute survey with Outside. They come and they ask for all the data from how we work, retention stats, diversity stats, and for having to Merrell make that list of one of the best places to work, I'm incredibly proud of. We just published our inclusivity report, which is a global study of how people from different classes, how they feel welcome or not welcome in the outdoors. Merrell's brand purpose. When I came to Merrell, we were known for building great functional shoes, but we didn't have a strong enough edge around brand purpose. And so the work that we did around brand purpose, I think I'm really proud of. Our brand purpose is to share the simple power of the outside, and then with everyone. And then the double click on is to share the simple power of the outside with everyone, no matter who you are, where you came from, who you love, or how you move. And this notion of inclusivity in the outdoors. I think for too long, the outdoors was this exclusive place where if you didn't look a certain way or act a certain way, you weren't welcome. And we think the outdoors is too special of a place to have anyone not feel welcome in it. So we've done a ton of work around that. And this inclusivity report, which we just published, is a global study about how people feel welcome in the outdoors or don't feel welcome in the outdoors. So I think the purpose work has been great. And then, I go back to, we started talking about, what it takes to run a brand or what's important. I think some of the product we brought to market is great. We're out winning awards for innovative performance outdoor footwear. So I'm really proud of that. But maybe most proud of is the team that we built, and how this team feels they belong here, and the work that they're doing each and every day. So it's pretty special.
It's amazing. You obviously have so many things to be proud of. You mentioned the people, and I'm wondering, this could be a whole separate hour, but when you think of building a team, what's the most important thing to you? I'm sure there's a list, but what's on top in terms of, hey, they've got to have, you mentioned hate to lose more than you like to win. That's a tough one to measure. I also feel like you kind of have to be, you might grow that if you've played like sports growing up. It's a hard thing to teach. So I'm wondering, if you think of a competency you look for maybe in an interview process as you're building your team, what's top of mind? What's number one?
Intellectual curiosity. People that just want to ask why and want to learn. And this notion of always learning, this notion of a growth mindset, this notion of being better today than you were yesterday, and strive to be better tomorrow. But I think intellectual curiosity is critically important. And this notion of being open to other ideas, even if they don't fit your perspective of the world. And then on that, I know I'm giving you more than one, but the intellectual curiosity also driven by diversity of opinions. And I love being in a room that bring diverse people together from different experiences, different backgrounds, and then debating in that rigorous sort of intellectual debate about what do we need to go do. Those are the meetings that I love. And then I most love us being able to argue, debate, have discourse around things that we don't see eye to eye on, but ultimately come together and align as a team. That's the fun.
Yeah, it sucks when like everyone just agrees with you, right? There's like nobody's telling the truth. There's this quote I was just thinking about that I recently jotted down from Jim Irsay, who's the owner of the Indianapolis Colts. He said, "Be fiercely open-minded. Anytime you close your mind to something, you have now joined the club of limitation."
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I love that, and there's the other quote too, and I'm gonna misquote it, but I'll be honest with you, I struggle with people that only see black and white, like people who are so convinced it's this or that. Like I actually gravitate towards people that see shades of gray, and people that aren't convinced of the right answer all the time. Like I actually gravitate more towards those people who aren't convinced that they're right about everything. Like I actually like people that have self-doubt, because I think self-doubt is about sort of like self-awareness and being open to other ideas. And then to me, it's also a big cue just for humbleness and sort of humility.
So a couple of things came to mind. One, there's one of my favorite podcast hosts, you might have seen him on my show, Ryan Hawk, host of the Learning Leader Show. And I've heard him say in passing, he tries not to think in absolutes. And that's sort of the black and white. And you mentioned the competency of humility. It makes me, and you probably read Pat Lencioni. His books are in every airport, right?
Yeah.
One of his books was The Ideal Team Player. And he said, obviously take this with a grain of salt, but the three sort of things that he said that you should really look for is someone that is hungry, humble, and smart. Hungry being, you don't have to, they're going to get up and they're sort of self-motivated in a way. Like you don't have to get them out of bed. Humility, hugely important. And then smart, not necessarily academic intelligence, but, do they have the sort of EQ to be in a room and not say something, really bad?
Yeah.
And he shares this Johnny Manziel example, which we can talk about, but like everyone thought like, hey, your 40-yard dash time, your vertical, whatever you did in college, they kind of throw out all the soft skills out the window in sports sometimes. So it's something that came to mind as you're talking about that.
For sure.
How are you doing on time? Do you have like a few more minutes? I know we have like 5 minutes scheduled.
This is great. I'm enjoying the conversation. Okay,
perfect. Tell me about, and I know you're and I'd love to hear sort of how you're involved, or if you were with like the TEDx talks. I am wondering though, like what's a talk that really impacted you in what way, and what was it? Because I'd love to share it.
Oh man.
And if it's like picking your baby, then you can name two.
How about I give you two books that have stuck with me? Can I take that path?
Yeah, sure.
And they're books. The first book, and I pull this book off the shelf all the time, but it is the notion of good to great. Like it is the quintessential business book. Everyone has it. Everyone's read it, but there's a reason why that's on the shelf. And when I start a new job or take a new responsibility, like I pull that book out, sort of remind myself about who's on the bus, dealing with the brutal facts, all of those very simple things about how to run a business. I think those can apply to anything in any brand. So I keep going back to Good to Great. I probably bought that book for more people in my lifetime, just because I think it's so important. And then
you mentioned, I think, is the Stockdale paradox, right?
Yeah.
Confronting the brutal facts of reality, but finding a way to move forward. Exactly. I love that concept.
It's so important. And I think that's that when I first came to Merrell, one of the very first exercises we did was just a brutal facts and talk about the Stockdale paradox and what does that mean? And then what do we go do with that was so important. And then I'll tell you something else that has really never left me. There's a book called The 5 Patterns of Extraordinary Careers. And in that book, it talks about 2 different types of leadership, the paradigms of dictatorial leadership or benevolent leadership. And I had honestly worked for a couple of dictatorial leaders and had been like, this is the way we're going to go do it. You're here to execute my vision. And the opposite of that is this benevolent leadership. And the metaphor that I tell my team, that I've told this is certainly as I've coached people, and certainly as I think about my own leadership style, is, the story is that there's leaders get up hills 2 different ways. A dictatorial leader thinks that it's his or her responsibility to put the team on his or her back and carry them up the hill. The notion of benevolent leadership is to build a team, get the right team, motivate and incent them and align them, and then ultimately that team carries you up the hill. And it's a super simple story, but it paints such a clear picture of I think of different leadership models. And I think we probably can all look at leaders in our past. I know I certainly can. Of that was a dictatorial leadership. Like, he thought his responsibility was to carry us all up the hill for us. And that just seems so dated to me. It is
kind of rare though, right? Because I mean, if I asked you how many great bosses, and without naming names, but like, how many have you had in your career? How many great bosses?
I've worked for some amazing leaders. As far as great managers, it's a relatively short list, but amazing experiences. And I do think one of the things about how I viewed the leaders I've worked for is, I think every leader, regardless of who you are, and my team would say this about me, there are things that we really like about some leaders and things that we don't like about some leaders. And then as you sort of weave together your own quilt of your own leadership styles, pull the best attributes and qualities from people that you've been around, but just don't weave in the things that you don't like. And if you can do those things,
you get to learn though, right? You get to learn from the things that maybe people shouldn't have done. So you've got to take in sort of all of it, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think taking all that in and then sort of coming up with your own self. And I think, it's been said a lot, but you have to find a style that's authentic to you. This idea of, showing up as your authentic self every single day. And, I've got some things that are easy for me to use, like I'm an introvert, like I'm generally pretty shy. I'm generally pretty quiet, but I'm 6'4" and I've got, receding hairline. So like I can play off those things. And I used to work those things to sort of what your style is. I'm also super transparent. I think, I really work to be an effective communicator. I try to tell people exactly what I know when I know it, and try to build some level of trust. Because ultimately, as a leader, I think you're trying to build trust in teams that will ultimately give you the benefit of the doubt. Because we all have really hard jobs. And I think ultimately, as a team, you want to build enough credibility over a period of time that your team will give you the benefit of the doubt in a tough moment. I've told new people, teams, or taken new responsibility, I've said probably 50 times, like, just suspend disbelief for a minute and give me a chance. You may not understand why I have this job or why I have this role or why things changed or what happened. I can't control any of that. Just suspend disbelief for a minute and give me a chance in this new job. And let's find a way to work together. And when you sort of give people that really honest moment, every person has had enough grace to give me a chance.
Oh, that's amazing. You mentioned earlier, one of your priorities is to show up and be a good dad, a good husband. You mind if I ask you a couple questions around that?
Sure.
Obviously, you're super career ambitious. What are the things that you do to show up as your best self at home and at work?
Well, if I'm honest, I probably that's a good question. In a moment of pure honesty, like, I probably work harder to show up better at work than I do at home, and that's a failing on my part. And I probably should do a better job of that with my wife and show up better than I do sometimes. At the same time, I try to create a lot of space for my kids and for the family, and try to create separation between work and home. Go to events, go to plays, go to sports practices, be a coach. Make sure you take the vacations, make sure you can put the iPhone down, or you can put work down, and create sort of hard lines between what is work and what is home. That is way easier said than done. And I probably, I know I could certainly do a better job at that. At the same time, one of the things that I've always tried to do is I try to have dinner with the kids every night. Luckily, I'm a morning person, so I like to be up early. But at the same time, I like to be home and ask Owen Henry how school was, or how are things going. Weekends are super important to us, so I try not to work on the weekends whenever I can. I try to like invest in, going for a hike, going cross country skiing, going on a trip, going out to a restaurant. But this notion of sort of investing time, and then really sort of active listening, like what's actually happening. But I would, it'd be disingenuous to tell you that I thought that I had it figured out. And it certainly would not be true if I told you that I thought I did both extraordinarily well. I think it's a struggle to come to work and be great every day. And it's a struggle to go home and be great every night.
Do you have, so you mentioned you're a morning person. I'm curious if you have any routines in the morning. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I am a creature of routine. So I don't like drama. I like knowing where things are, what I'm going to go do. So I love to work out. Working out in the morning with a trainer. I get up at 4:30. I go work out with my trainer, and I show up to work. I get to my office about 6:30. Take a shower. And this is, we were talking earlier about, how you learn to manage yourself. I needed that. I needed the exercise in the morning to sort of get up, move my body, have someone, yell at me in the gym. And then I needed to come in and have a cup of coffee and have, 30 minutes to myself to get my day thoughts organized before the rest of the team came in that day. So, I get up, I like to be the first one in the office. I like to have that space, because then when everyone else comes in, I've sort of taken care of myself mentally and physically, and I'm ready to be good that day. So the days that I don't get to go to the gym, I have to work extra hard to be great at 8 o'clock.
How many days a week do you typically go?
5 days, Monday through Friday, I go to the gym.
How would you describe your sleep? Is it pretty good? Do you have any sort of nighttime sort of routines?
It's funny. I'm a morning person, which I mean, but I go to bed early. So if I'm not on my bed at 8:59 at night, like I get nervous. Like if the clock strikes 9 o'clock at night and I'm not in bed already, I'm nervous. So I try to wind down at night, have dinner. I sort of do that last sort of check of what's happening at work. I like to read, so I read at night. Jill and I'll watch a Netflix show or something, or I take a shower and then I try to go to bed. I just started taking magnesium, so we'll see if that helps my sleep.
Interesting. I took some last night. I've also bought some like Epsom salt, so you soak it in your feet. So I'm just trying to sort of hack. I'm always curious. Okay,
I'm always trying to, like, I read and listen. I'm always trying, like I'm a sucker for the latest thing to try. So like I'm about all of those sorts of things. Whether there's this new acupuncture pad that you like lay on at night before you go to sleep. So I'm trying one of those. So I love all of the wellness stuff that helps you perform better or be healthier. So I love the wellness trend.
Have you ever slept on like one of those pads that cools down or heats up?
No, I need one of those cool pads for sure.
I'll have to send you I've been using 8 Sleep, and you can literally time it to where it'll wake you up if you want. So I can jump into bed and it be as hot as possible. I just like that. And then I can't really like fall asleep like that. And then so I dip it down to like maybe 80 degrees, 15 minutes later, and then it'll cool down at night, and then it'll wake me up in the morning. So you can actually, which is kind of nice. There's other options, but you can kind of time it, which is interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you can do half the bed. So you can pick, which is cool. Okay. If you have periods of unfocus, or if you feel like you're off track, what do you do to get back on track?
Go for a walk outside. And luckily I work for an outdoor brand that supports just this notion of outside. But I think out from a wellness perspective, a couple mile walk is one of the best things to clear your head. And I walk or hike almost every day now. We certainly in the throes of the pandemic, walking was what we did. Luckily, I've got a Labrador at home, and so I'll walk my dog when I get home, or walk my dog on the weekends. But just a simple walk to get up, to move, to stretch, to get some sun on your skin, to feel the wind, to notice that, you know, in Michigan, we've got the changing the seasons. So there's always the changing the seasons in Michigan is amazing. So just to notice leaves or grass or the angle of the sun, any one of those things outside is a respite. So just getting outside.
I had a virtual trainer for a while, and I'll have one again for a few months. And they used to say on the like sort of active rest days, go for an hour walk. And I thought it was ridiculous. You know, like I'm not going to go for a walk. You know, I'd throw on an Apple Watch and I would just go. And I agree with you. Like it took me a little while to get out, but it's hard to explain how sort of calming it is to get outside.
I crave walks now. Like I literally I crave walks, like, you know, whether it's my wife and I with our dog on the weekends, you know, before our kids get going, or you know, it's whether it's at night after work, or if I'm happen to be working home for one day and I've got, you know, a half an hour between Zoom calls, I'll just take the dog and we'll go for a quick mile walk and get back. And it's amazing what it does for your mind.
Yeah. Okay. I meant to ask you, do you have any rules around technology in the house?
Oh man. I wish I did. I need to get better about not having the iPhone on my nightstand. But I use it as my alarm clock, which is a bad excuse, because I know there's a million brands that are selling clocks that I don't need in my iPhone, but it is certainly there. It's amazing. You know, you've got kids too, like, you know, what technology means to them. So we talk a lot about screen time and, you know, being on your phone, being on your iPad. So we need to get better. We do have some, but our enforcement is lax.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. That's my 5-year-old policing me. So no phones at the dinner table, and he's quick to remind me. So it's funny. What's the best investment you've made, whether it be time, money, energy, whatever it is that comes to mind? What's the best investment you've made in yourself?
My trainer. Without a doubt, my trainer. I mean, and I've been with him for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. I used to go to the gym and do my own thing, which wasn't super successful. I hurt my back a couple of times, and I finally hired a trainer who's amazing. And he's fundamentally sort of changed my life, both from a physical perspective on sort of, and the thing I love about him, it's not just about getting big. It's about, you know, how do we take your body and allow your body to perform the best it can for as long as it can, you know? So like, think about like aging well.
You're like the next Tom Brady is essentially that.
And I think about those things, like, what can I do today that's going to make me better at 60? And I'm thankful that I found him, and he sort of transformed my life. I wish I would have known someone at 30, because I'd be in a way better place than I am today. But you know, he's awesome. He's motivating. He's done, you know, he's certainly, I feel better. Physically, I'm much better, but certainly mentally, just, you know, seeing him as much as I do, that is a great extravagance, and it's a privilege to be able to work with someone like that. But that's an easy answer for me as my trainer.
Yeah, no, I love that. Any other quotes that you carry with you in good or tough times? I know you mentioned one earlier, but any others come to mind?
Is it a Churchill? When going through hell, keep going. I'm not sure.
I might be, or never quit. I used to have a Churchill bookmark.
Yeah. Like there's something about that. I do love, you know, Angela Duckworth has this book, Grit, which is this just great book about, you know, looking at all these people that have been successful in life and what are the common denominators, whether you're a Navy SEAL or a professional athlete or whatever. And this notion of, you know, it's not about sort of natural talent or ability. It's just this notion of grit and resilience and not giving up. So, you know, for me, I have great respect for people that fight through tough times, that sort of face really impossible odds, and who achieve success. So for me, this notion of grit, especially someone who is very, very average and mediocre, you know, how do I keep finding tools that help me to perform? And this notion of grit is critically important.
2 last questions. Is there a book that has impacted you the most that you gift? Was it Good to Great, or is there another book?
Good to Great is certainly right up there. Grit was the first book. We did a Merrell book club at the outset of the pandemic. When everyone on March 12th, I sent everyone home for the pandemic. We started sort of a Merrell book club. Grit was the first book that we put on that list because it was so important, to get through. And You could write a book about leading businesses through the pandemic, but that was an important book. So those two are really good. The other one that's good is, when I promote someone to a big role or a friend gets promoted, the first 90 days is actually a really good sort of just good book about, how to sort of view new jobs and how to lay a foundation for success and bring in key stakeholders and how to view it. So the first 90 days, I'd recommend anyone starting a new job, even if you're old like me and you get a new job, pull that book back out, because there's just so many good nuggets in there as you start a new job.
Great recommendations. I love that book. Okay, last question. What are 2 or 3 pieces of general life or career advice that you would give someone early on in their career wanting to make an impact in this world?
And we touched on it a little bit, but on the periphery, like, get to know yourself. Really begin to understand, what motivates you. Where do you get energy from? How do you process information? How do you take data in? How do you make decisions? So, I remember I went to a Center for Creative Leadership in Colorado Springs. Gap sent me there to be developing leadership, and I had taken the Myers-Briggs test before, and when I went to sign in at the Center for Creative Leadership, the person checking me in said, "Oh, we want you to meet somebody." And they took me over to meet one of the professors. Like, this is Chris Hufnagel from the Gap. And the professor was like, "Oh, I wanted to meet you because you were the highest introvert we've tested in a long time. And I actually wanted to meet you." So like this notion of getting to know yourself. And I told you the Gap story about the person who pulled me out and said, you're not showing up today. And that was before I had really learned about who I was or how I process information. I didn't even really know what an extrovert or introvert was at the time. I just thought I was different from everybody else. And so anyone young in their career, invest in a tool like Myers-Briggs or Insights Discovery. Invest in one of those things, because I think the sooner you can know about yourself, the better you can manage yourself. And then ultimately, if you can do those things well, it unleashes so much opportunity.
Have you ever read into like Susan Cain's books, like Quiet, kind of? She's one of those thought leaders around being an introvert.
Yeah.
Did you find it helpful?
I did. Yeah. The Introvert Advantage, like all of those books. Yeah. No, I've either bought them or people have sent them to me. So yeah, those are all good.
Okay, cool. That was on my list. Chris, I really appreciate you leaning in, man, to this. I love this conversation. It was just, the more people are just open about the good stuff, the things that maybe they would have done differently. I feel like this is the stuff that people want to hear, right? It's those inflection points that you describe beautifully, right? And the things that, I feel like people can get inspiration from, but also it's like real life applicable, right? So I appreciate you doing that.
I really appreciate your time, and I really enjoy following you. So good luck with everything, and I appreciate the interest.
Thanks. Appreciate it, and look forward to putting this together.
Awesome. Be safe.